Hello, this is the RPG Crawler, and welcome to another episode of Tabletops and Taverns, the show where I talk about subjects relevant to tabletop role-playing games. This week, I hope you're in a D&D mood because I am about to talk about alignments. One of the most iconic features of Dungeons & Dragons, and one of the only subjects that has come close to wrecking as many tabletop friendships as the Addition Wars. Now, before I even start, let me address that vocal minority that always feels the need to chime in because they don't agree with a particular tabletop role-playing trope. This is a video about alignments. If you're one of the no alignments whatsoever crowd, I'm not going to make a judgment call as to whether alignments as a whole in every situation are a valid concept. Feel free to watch and see what I have to say on them and then come to your own decision about whether or not you still don't want to use them. But please don't just sit there and leave comments to the effect that, oh, alignments are a crude and silly tool for the intellectually inferior. They have no place in my games and have no place in yours. Because quite frankly, I don't want to hear it. This is strictly speaking for those people who do use alignments or who want to use alignments in their game. I mean, if you don't, that's cool. There's plenty of places to convince people not to use them, but this video, and this comment section is not the place to make that particular call. Now, that's out of the way. Alignments. Alright, one of the most commonly argued about facets of Dungeons & Dragons, and there's various branch games, because a lot of the games that branched off of Dungeons & Dragons, like the Retro Clones and Pathfinder and so on and so forth, still use the alignment system. What is an alignment? An alignment is basically your character's overall outlook on life. Not necessarily their personality, not necessarily their specific beliefs, but how they approach moral and ethical problems. Some fantasy games have similar alignment systems beyond the basic D&D one, but since the Dungeons & Dragons alignment system is the most commonly known one, between it and Pathfinder and so on and so forth, then we're going to stick with the basic D&D system. Now, as iconic as the D&D alignment system is, nowadays at least, it has changed a few times over the years. In the original box, as well as in the subsequent D&D basic set, there was only one axis, so to speak. You had three alignments: lawful, neutral, and chaotic. And this was very much in line, really, with the old sword and sorcery style of fantasy fiction, which provided a lot of inspiration to the early game. Now, those sorts of fiction typically refrained from making value judgments on whether a character's actions were good, objectively good, or objectively evil, except in the most extreme of cases. And there's a good reason for that, is because there's a lot of gray areas when you're talking about old school fantasy. Instead, they focused on a kind of cosmic contest. Not all of them, but many of the greats really focused on the sort of cosmic contest between the forces of civilization and order, and then the strange, weird, and unknowable alien-type forces of chaos. And then everything else, most of everybody else, from the basic wilderness to the random peasantry and so on and so forth, were somewhere in the middle between those two extremes. Personally, I kind of prefer the three alignment system, as it actually lends itself to a grittier sort of setting without going overboard real ham-fisted on the whole shades of gray shtick. It allows for a kind of moral ambiguity without making that ambiguity the central theme of everything. It doesn't entirely divorce itself from the judgment calls about good and evil, but it casts them in, I guess, a more practical light. You know, the heroes need not be shining paragons of virtue. They operate either for law or for chaos or good or evil based on their own needs and their own desires. Selflessly saving the world from an evil cultist doesn't necessarily have to happen. They would probably want to save the world from an evil cultist because they live on the world and they don't want to die. The heroes, lawful heroes are lawful in such a 3-axis setting, not merely because they uphold the law on occasion or they have their own code, but because their livelihood, and in many cases their very existence, are inextricably bound towards the protections and sometimes comforts that civilization itself and the order that is behind it have to offer. And then that very cultist that they may be, going up against isn't merely chaotic because, on occasion he rebelled against authority. He's chaotic because he's making pacts with otherworldly beings who will destroy the world. Not necessarily because they want to, not necessarily because it is their goal, but rather because their very presence is inimical to the order on which mankind depends on to survive. Because without that order, mankind is basically a hairless ape in the middle of the wilderness, In that kind of sort of 3-alignment setting, most characters are neutral. Neutral player characters don't necessarily hold to an absolute balance between good and evil, like is suggested in some later aspects of alignment descriptions. I mean, yeah, a couple of them are. But rather they tend to look towards what is most beneficial to them and their self-interest at the time. And now before you go on, oh, that sounds evil, oh, that sounds greedy, keep in mind most people in the real world will look out for themselves first, their family second, and their friends and close and other relatives third. And we don't live in a world where everybody everywhere is cutting each other down the street all the time. Yeah, in some places it functions like that in the real world. But for the most part, people get along. They have this live and let live philosophy. Part of that is because of fear of punishment of the law, but a lot of it is simply because running up and just straight up jacking someone and taking their shit is not usually, it's not only not always, but it's not usually the best course of action long term. You eventually run out of people to straight up jack and take their shit. Usually it's better to live and let live and trade and go forth, with your neighbors in a relatively harmonious, although not interfering manner. And this whole live and let live aspect of humanity, that, is present in varying degrees to most societies, but if you ask me, the fact that it's so widespread and the fact that it's so effective, that sounds, that whole idea that you do what you do and your neighbor does what they do and you don't fuck with each other, that sounds like a very neutral worldview. Not necessarily even a lawful worldview, but a very neutral worldview. And thus, most people, you would assume, fit the whole neutral alignment. Of course, what I mentioned about the cultists seeking to summon some sort of Lovecraftian horror, or the heroes that uphold the law, absolutely whatever they want, are the extremes of those alignment systems. There's numerous lesser instances that I could name, and there's a whole range in each alignment that can be taken as examples, but they all share that same common goal. On the side of law, which is the side of order and civilization, you've got the righteous priest that tends to the downtrodden, but you also have the corrupt official that's using the weight of the courts to extort money for his own gain. And they're both representative of civilization, whether you like it or not. Those are both representative of the ups and downs of order and civilization. In the Lockmar series, for instance, the Thieves Guild, as full of cutthroats and backstabbing scoundrels as it was, it had its own codes, had its own laws. It was part of the civilization of Nuon. And in the instances where members of the Thieves Guild violated those laws, it didn't go well for them. It brought a pretty sudden doom and chaos down upon everybody involved. And there is that example, for instance. There it is again, that idea that chaos is constantly looking for a way to insinuate itself in an orderly society, and then its very presence makes everything go to shit. Now, on the side of chaos, not everything needs to be some cosmic force just threatening civilization all the time. It can be very, very minor. In classic D&D, for instance, the orc, like just generally orcs, they're a primitive, savage creature that opposes civilization instinctively, not because all orcs are necessarily evil, although a lot of times that holds true, but all orcs are pretty chaotic in and of their own ways. They've got the temperament not unlike a wounded wild boar. And even if you factor out any sort of inherent evil in that, they're still very chaotic as a result, just by a result of that whole raging outlook. And it's really, really hard to be on friendly terms and have a constructive criticism with a creature that even a friendly card game can end up with an axe to the skull because they just can't control their tempers. Anyway, there's a whole there's a whole set of examples where chaos, even though it is not necessarily all evil all the time, at least in the older school stuff, it's not necessarily all evil all the time, can still be very damaging to civilization. So what you would assume is chaotic good in a modern 2-axis system could be very well neutral or lawful in one of those older systems, just because they don't. You can disrespect authority while still being kind of committed to the idea of civilization and the protections that it affords the less fortunate, and so on and so forth. Anyway, to make a long story short, the whole 3-element alignment system tended to de-emphasize alignment in general and urge people towards a more neutral outlook overall. I mean, hell, in the white box, the alignment system barely got a sentence of explanation. Like, seriously, it was like one sentence of explanation. And it only affected a very few things. Alignments, which, while they weren't fluid, they had a lot of leeway within them. You could do a lot and still be lawful. You could do a lot and still be chaotic or neutral. And it really didn't impact the game in terms of mechanics that much. I think there was like some detect evil and detect good spells, and the DM really had to make a judgment call on those. And then like reincarnation. That reincarnated you as a creature based on your alignment. And I think that's basically about it. I mean, the later supplements like Greyhawk and so on and so forth added some more things for alignment, but it was generally very simple in the white box. Alright, then let's fast forward to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was a system where they started really formalizing like everything all the way down the line. And it introduced what is generally called the 2-axis alignment system. It's got a good and evil axis along with the usual law and neutral, or the law and chaos axis. And that produces 9 alignments. Lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, lawful neutral, neutral neutral, or true neutral, then chaotic neutral, and then lawful evil, neutral evil, and chaotic evil. And just to make matters worse, this is about the time where they introduced a cosmology of afterlives that you could go to depending solely on your alignment. Just when you died, you would go to one of the 9 different planes. And then a few classes were added, which were strongly tied to alignments. And then it made it more relevant to certain spells. And as a result, spells and certain abilities now depended on what alignment your character held, and because the general tone of the rules was stricter, so was the perception that alignments should be strictly held to. Basically, they put mechanical weight behind a character's actions. Let's not even mention alignment languages. And yes, they were a thing. In AD&D, you could actually speak lawful good or chaotic evil. Whatever. It was a rule that was ignored just about as much as the optional weapon type versus armor type rule. Yeah, there was something about that too. I may get into that someday. Anyway, back to the topic that actually matters. Once you start putting actual mechanical weight behind a character's behavior, that is, their alignment, then suddenly people veer all the way into extremely strict interpretations of them. And I'm not talking about people interpreting their own character's actions. I'm talking about people at the table judging other people's characterizations. And therein lies the whole problem that a lot of people have with their alignments. When you start treating alignments like straitjackets, when you start putting a mechanical weight behind them, you encourage people to enforce behavior on a character that might be contrary to what that character's player may wish to do. If you've ever heard somebody say, your character wouldn't do that because it's not their alignment, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. In my opinion, that's one of the most asinine things an RPG player can say to another player about their character. It's not to say that every single thing can be justified under every alignment. I mean, I've had people playing paladins that try to justify murder and torture for the greater good. And yeah, let me think about that. No. No. However, there is a world of difference between a hard alignment system and a soft one. Now, I define it as this. If your DM uses a hard system for alignments, they're the ones that will tell you, no, your character wouldn't do that, it's not his alignment. They simply, flat out, disallow actions. It's as if your alignment was a program and your character was a robot. Whereas in a soft alignment system, you've got some flexibility in your character's actions. Instead of restricting your character's actions like a straitjacket, soft systems will adapt your character's alignment to your character's actions, instead of the other way around. Yes, some of these soft systems may penalize you somewhat if you end up actually, shifting your alignment so far that it actually changes. And that's okay. That's honestly okay. The important part is that you don't have someone effectively telling you what your character would or would not do. That's something that should only ever really be done when your character is under some sort of mind-affecting effect or something. Charm, domination, helm of opposite alignment, something like that. Something that actually changes your character's processes. And then you might have somebody go ahead and say, oh, wait a minute, remember this, they're not thinking like that anymore. A lot of times, when I hear complaints from people that have a real problem with the alignment system in D&D or alignment systems in general, they seem to be describing that hard system where the character's actions are prohibitively restricted based on their alignment choice. I think the best argument that I can muster against a hard alignment system, aside from the fact that it puts people off, is that from the first edition of AD&D, an edition that some people might say had a hard alignment system built in, despite the system itself not emphasizing alignment effects as much as later editions did, you had paladins. And paladins were classically the most stringent alignment requirement of any class. Not anymore, mind you. But they did. They had a really strict alignment requirement at that point. They had to be lawful good. Always upholding virtue and order, etc., and so forth. Now, in the class description, it tells you what happens if a paladin ever knowingly and willingly connects an evil act. If ever they knowingly and willingly commit an evil act. Think about that. If your character wouldn't do that, it's not his alignment rubbish is in play, then that whole line is bullshit. Because if they couldn't do it, if they were just incapable of breaking their alignment from a player standpoint, then there wouldn't be penalties in the damn text. I mean, there wouldn't be penalties described for what happened if you did it. So that's like my number one argument against the hardcore, oh, your character cannot do that kind of thing. I view alignments as the rough average of your character's actions. Not every neutral good character is going to be all neutral, all good, all the time. There are some times where they may veer into more lawful territory or more chaotic territory as a matter of necessity. If it's well played, the character should be able, you should be able to plot most of the character's major decision point actions on a chart. And the vast majority of them, vast majority of those dots are going to be in the neutral good territory if they're neutral good. And there are certain options. Now, there's certain actions a character can take that will irrevocably change their alignment all at once, just instantly and completely. If, for instance, you're a knight of a particular order, and you randomly betray your order to devote yourself to some dark master, then chances are good you're going to be evil. If you follow said evil leader's command and go slaughter a bunch of younglings in some sort of temple, then yeah, you're going to go full-on hard evil. Your alignment done shifted, man. May as well write that shit character in ink on your character sheet or on permanent marker or something. Hope you did it for something worthwhile and not just some bad dream about your wife dying or something. Ain't no getting out of that. I mean, no amount of throwing your evil boss down an elevator shaft later on is ever going to redeem you from that shit, man. Anyway, as for soft alignment systems, there's one that's introduced in the Pathfinder source books. I don't remember which one. I think it was touched on in Ultimate Campaign. I believe that it was expanded on in Pathfinder Unchained. I forget exactly. I'd have to take a look. Anyway, there's details on it in the Pathfinder SRD. And I actually think it's a really good one. It basically divides the classic alignment axes. Instead of into 3, there's 9 steps, with each segment, lawful, chaotic, or lawful, neutral, and chaotic, good, neutral, and evil, having 3 sub-steps within it. So good has 3 subsections, neutral has 3 subsections, etc., etc. And each time you undertake a major decision point or action with an alignment consequence in the course of an adventure, like up to a certain amount of times in an adventure, then it can shift your alignment a step along those axes. And then, just as you cross a boundary, you have like 24 hours or so to either affirm your alignment, either through actively, consciously deciding, oh, this is my new alignment, or through continuing to commit those acts that are in line with your new alignment, or you can try and do something to back up and go back to your original alignment. And that's, I mean, I'm sure there's more to it than that. There's a very simplified version of that system, but it's an interesting way to go about things, and it kind of formalizes the whole, scatterplot kind of thing that I usually do. I prefer to give characters in general a little leeway in their alignments. They can make mistakes, they can act off alignment a few times without really worrying about changing things. And yes, I even give that option to paladins. Or should I say, I prefer to give that option to paladins. And paladins, for those who are wondering what's a paladin, are they're kind of, well, they were holy warriors. Were being the operative word. They're like in the earlier editions, all the way through 3rd edition, actually. They had to be lawful, they had to be good, they had to be upstanding, decent, basically everything you'd imagine a knight in shining armor should be. I mean, now they can be any alignment, as long as they're still a holy warrior devoted to some cause. So if their god is neutral, then they have to be neutral. If their god is evil, then they have to be evil. But back in the day, if they weren't strictly lawful good, they would fall and essentially become shitty fighters, and there was not a lot of fun in that. Now, some DMs could be, and some DMs still are, really, really hardcore about what a character can or cannot do without falling. You have DMs that will make a character, a paladin, fall for the slightest infraction, just the slightest misstep, and that would totally mess the character up. As a result, very few people played paladins, at least in a lot of the games that I played in, that DMs were like that on. And those that did were honestly kind of forced to be assholes about being the paladin. They had to be lawful asshole, I think it's called, or lawful stupid, whatever. And that was in their defense, a lot of them played that way, not because of some sort of misinterpretation of what good and law entails, but because they had a constant concern about having their character fall for looking at somebody funny. You know, I mean, you have a DM that's going to just say, "Oh, fuck you! You didn't stop and give that peasant a dime. You have fallen irrevocably." Boom. Now, I, on the other hand, give a little bit of flexibility to a character's code of behavior. I allow them the occasional harmless slip or the victimless vice, like drinking, that kind of thing. Something that would ordinarily render them... The reason drinking is kind of a vice for a paladin is because it takes away their self-control and makes them more susceptible to chaotic actions. Anyway, but let's not talk about the specifics of any particular vice. But the fact that I allowed them to do a little bit. And why... You'd think, oh, it makes it harder to make a paladin fall. Ironically, that little leeway actually made it easier for paladins to fall. And because the whole give them an inch and they'll take a mile kind of thing. And when they did fall, their fall was honestly more epic and more believable. You know, a lot of times when you get these DMs that enforce a paladin's fall with the drop of a hat, you get these binary switches where all of a sudden they go, oh, shit, I lied to somebody yesterday. Now I have to make a pact with some demon, slaughter a town, and become a blackguard in order to maintain some sort of useful mechanical advantage for my character. And that just strikes me as fucking silly. I mean, I hate to bring up video games and shit in this, but if you've played Neverwinter Nights, and you know the story of Arabeth, and what happened was she was in love with this elf. Because they were both elves. She was in love with this elf. And this elf got tricked and was basically used to bring a plague to a town. Through no fault of his own. No fault of his own, mind you. He genuinely got tricked. And then because she was in love with him, she felt bad for it, and all of a sudden, anti-paladin. And that struck me as one of the stupidest paladin falls I've ever seen in a video game. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that are real fans of Arabeth, but holy fuck, that was worse than the heel turn of fucking Darth Vader. I mean, it was just instantaneously, oh shit, the love of my life was hanged in treason. Now I need to go ahead and... I mean, yeah, I guess there's like a deep and sentimental thing, but it was just like so instant and so instantaneously bad that it just boggled my mind. On retrospect. I mean, at the time it seemed okay, pretty decent, but in retrospect, it was just terrible. And I like to avoid that sort of thing. I like to make a character just get this gradual decline that's believable. Like a paladin who likes who likes the ladies and hits a bit of the sauce, for instance, from time to time. And they may turn around and one day find you got these couple women from this village with kids in tow petitioning him for marriage. Or at the very least, some sort of child support for something he may not even remember because it was months ago in game time. If it was in a monogamous culture, especially, that would cause some serious problems. That would cause not only scandal, but this guy is now forced to pick, basically, and he done fucked up. And this gives the character, even that little slip may not necessarily be enough for a character to fall unless it violates some other part of his ethos. Because having kids is not inherently evil. Having a relationship with a willing partner is not inherently evil. Having fun is not inherently evil. But it starts that slippery slope where they're sitting there saying, okay, well now I have to own up to the consequence of my actions. And a lot of players... Even the ones that are playing the lawful good paladin, if they give them that much rope, all of a sudden they're going to be looking for ways to avoid said consequences. And almost always, when they try to avoid said consequences, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you just let them dig their own fucking grave. And at the end of the day, you don't have to be uptight about that paladin's every move. once you give them that little leeway and let them snowball, they're probably going to have their paladin fall, and they're going to do it in a manner that they'll look back and say, oh shit, where did it all go wrong? It's not going to be an instantaneous, I'm evil now. It's going to be one of those, oh shit, things are getting really out of control. How do I stop it? How do I stop it? And they're either going to stop it or they're going to continue to snowball. And either way, it's going to be much more believable and much better than just the whole, I've kicked a puppy, now I have to go kill everybody. Alright, aside from paladins, which admittedly no alignment discussion can go far without mention of paladins. But aside from them, the whole idea of a soft alignment enforcement, like I just described, allows for more nuanced character play, and in the end, a more believable and enjoyable characterization of any character, while still maintaining the alignments as a guideline and a good quick rule of thumb for how a character may act. De-emphasizing alignment from secondary mechanical rules is a huge help as well, and one which I very much appreciate 5th edition doing. 5th edition has a looser alignment system than the previous few editions. It treats it more as a guideline than the editions immediately prior to it, and that's with good reason. And in order to get to that, we have to go back to the prior systems. Remember when I said about AD&D, they started to integrate alignments with the game mechanics, things like Smite Evil and like protection from evil, that sort of thing. Well, this came to a head in 3rd edition and 3.5 edition, where there were so many alignment-based effects, from special abilities to spells to even certain attacks, that it was mechanically advantageous to play certain alignments. Like, you literally were better off playing certain alignments. And in these instances, a min-maxer, and there's one at every table, don't bother denying it. There is a min-maxer at every fucking table. It just is a matter of how overt they are. Anyway, a min-maxer would explicitly pick a certain alignment to avoid certain effects in the game, and still be able to justifiably play certain actions with their character. And that's not a good reason to pick an alignment. You do not pick an alignment because you want to avoid a certain amount of spells. You pick an alignment because you think you'd enjoy playing it. 4th edition solved this, but it solved this in the most ham-handed way possible. Number one, it reduced or eliminated almost every effect that hinged on alignment. I mean, I could be wrong, but I didn't see a whole hell of a lot of alignment-based effects in 4th edition. And number two, it changed the alignment system. It did this in part to avoid the whole min-max draw of certain alignments, but it also eliminated certain alignments that people had a hard time envisioning. And let's be honest, a lot of 4th edition was changed because of what the designers perceived, not necessarily the players, but the designers perceived that the players were having difficulties doing. I find that approach kind of condescending. I find it patronizing, and I digress. Let's get out of 4th edition territory. People should know my opinions of 4th edition by now. They're not uncommon. Anyway, the point is, they didn't need to change the alignment system if they were already taking alignment out of consideration for effects and spells. Because, you change the alignment system, it not only kind of messed up people's perceptions of the rules, but it changed the basic cosmology of D&D. Because a lot of the outer planes were kind of based on the whole 9 alignments thing. And once you start changing some to eliminate some planes, you got to figure out how to fit the iconic ones in elsewhere, and then you end up with shit like the elemental chaos. Anyway, they did a lot more changes in the 4th edition cosmology than just the alignment-based planes. But that's something we can talk about another time. Anyway, I'm rambling. 5th edition. 5th edition, for the most part, restored the alignment system to the 9 alignment system as it existed prior to 4th edition. It kept the unaligned alignment, which I don't think is a bad thing. Unaligned is basically the alignment that you give something that has no alignment. So, like animals, plants, rocks, that kind of thing. Anyway, yeah, 5th edition, they removed a lot of the mechanical reasons to prefer one alignment over the other, and restored the original 2-axis alignment. And I have to be honest, the number of arguments about alignment I've seen since 5th edition came out in general has really, really decreased. I mean, that might just be me, and mind you, I don't get to play a lot of 5th edition, not nearly as much as I've played prior editions, but in my view and my experience, the amount of alignment arguments has decreased since they put the old alignments back, but then they made them less important, I guess. It subsided almost to like the bare murmur that was more common in early versions of the game, where you didn't have major mechanics based on alignment. They just talk about flaws and bonds instead, which is its own discussion. Its own method of putting mechanical weight to a character's actions. And I actually like the flaw and bond system. It's actually pretty neat. Anyway, we'll talk about that some other time. There, you got it. That's alignments. That's my spiel on it. I use a soft alignment system with a bit of flexibility and the ability to kind of drift through alignments as you change. I do put an experience penalty in most of these systems that I use it on, unless there's another penalty specifically prescribed for it. I do it because it provides nuanced role-playing opportunities. It gives the ability for my villains and so on and so forth to gradually corrupt the PCs without making it a whole binary switchover. And because, quite frankly, certain interpretations of alignments are very subjective, and sometimes they can be difficult to adjudicate until they become, if they're a constant problem, then yeah, but sometimes you just got to give somebody a little give and take and realize that you may not view an alignment the same way as somebody else. Anyway, if you have your own alignment system, please let me know how you approach it in the comments below. I know I haven't gone into much on how to actually play the individual alignments. I will be doing a few other Tabletop and Taverns episodes as follow-ups to this one on how I like seeing certain alignments portrayed, and then maybe tips on how to play them. Hopefully, you'll be able to keep an eye out for those in the future, and they won't be long in coming. For now, this has been the RPG Crawler. I hope you like what you've seen, and remember to leave a like if you did. Leave me a comment if you got feedback, as I said, and subscribe for more RPG content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.